Befell that in that season on a day in Southwark, at the Tabard, as he lie ready to wenden on me pilgrimage to Canterbury, with full devout courage, at nicht were come into that hostelrie well 29, in a company of sundry folk, the aventury falle in fellowship. And pilgrimes were they alle. What on earth is this? And why does it sound a bit like English? This is from the opening to the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, and it's written in the 14th century. And if it wasn't for this poem, the language you speak and the words used in your favourite books, movies and TV shows would sound very different. I'm Jay Draper, and this is Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. In his story, a group of pilgrims are setting off to visit a shrine at Canterbury Cathedral, and they set off from a pub in London called the Tabard. Chaucer introduces us to the landlord of the Tabard, Harry Bailey, who announces a game to pass the time on the journey. Hello, pilgrims. I want to play a little game. Each person will tell 2 stories on the way there and 2 on the way back. The best story will get a free dinner on his return. A good way to get repeat business, I reckon. Now that's 29 pilgrims, 4 stories each, so that's 116 stories. So, you'll be happy to know you don't have to slog through all of them to read the Canterbury Tales. Even Chaucer only manages to finish 24 of them. In fact, he gives up on writing this before they even make it to Canterbury. So, for all you writers out there that have a half-finished novel in a drawer, take heart. Chaucer never finished his main work, and he's the father of English literature. His characters come from all different walks of life, like a fellowship of the ring. There's a knight, a prioress and her nuns, a corrupt friar, a university clerk, a cook, a miller, and the wife of Bath, a well-travelled widow. The stories they tell are also really varied and come from lots of different genres and have lots of different messages. It's an unusual story for the time in that it's not about kings or saints or knights of the Round Table. These are ordinary people, often working class people that his 14th century readers would recognise. Some of them are even actual people. Harry Bailey was a real person who ran a pub in London. The cook is probably based on a famous actual cook called Roger of Ware. And not only that, but it's being written in ordinary people's language. As weird as it sounds to us today, to wenden on me pilgrimage, this is how ordinary people would have spoken English in the 14th century. It's a kind of English called Middle English, as in after Old English, Koning shale on helle, begastelen. Berra shale on heather, el daneusful. Ea of duna shale flodgrave ferran. And before Modern English. If music be the food of love, play on. Give me excess of it, that surfeiting the appetite may sicken and so die. It took me a lot fewer takes to get this one right. Part of the reason it sounds so weird is that in Middle English, you pronounce words a lot more phonetically than in Modern English. So you pronounce the E at the end of pilgrimage, and you pronounce the H in nicht. Sometimes if you see Middle English written down, it is a bit easier to work out because our pronunciation has changed a lot more than our spelling has. Before the Canterbury Tales, poets don't really write in English much. They write in French or Latin. English is a peasant's language, and peasants can't read. Because of this, Chaucer is the first person we know of who even wrote down a lot of English words. If you're flicking through the etymology section of the Oxford English Dictionary, always a fun way to spend a Friday night, you'll see him everywhere. Acceptable, alkali, altercation, amble, angrily, annex, annoyance, approaching, arbitration, armless, army, arrogant, arsenic, artillery. The first person we know of who wrote them down was Chaucer. Now, If this was all Chaucer did, then he would be mentioned in a lot of historical footnotes, and he would be interesting, but he wouldn't be influential. If history had gone down another trouser leg, then perhaps people would have read Chaucer and gone, yeah, that's fine, I guess, and then gone right back to writing in French. What gets him the rest of the way, the reason he's had such a huge effect on the history of the English language, is also being super popular. The Canterbury Tales is wildly popular in its day. We have a huge number of copies that survive from his time. 83! It doesn't sound like a lot, but bear in mind that this is before the printing press comes to England, so every single one of those 83 copies has to be written out by hand. So luckily, Chaucer isn't relying on huge sales to live off. He has a wealthy patron called John of Gaunt who basically gives him money to live off while Chaucer writes his poems. This is pretty common in the medieval period, and it's seen as a way of enhancing your own social position. Only cultured and sophisticated people would surround themselves with good artists. You want to bring back English traditions? Become a patron! In fact, the Canterbury Tales is so popular that even 100 years later, when the printing press comes to England, one of the first books off the press is the century-old Canterbury Tales. Before the printing press, if you want a single copy of a book, you have to write out the entire book, by hand, one word at a time. The printing press, and movable type especially, makes the act of publishing a book cheaper and faster. And suddenly you can do all sorts of things you couldn't do before. You can have newspapers, which have to be written at short notice. You can have revolutionary pamphlets, which can be made by someone who doesn't have the resources of a whole monastery of monks writing your words out for you. Which means you can have revolutions. But the press isn't universally hailed as a great idea. Whenever a new technology appears, there are people who are wary of it. And that brings us to the sponsor for this video, Kids These Days. Some people thought that copying books out by hand builds character. A man called Johannes Trithemius writes, "Brothers, no one should think or say, 'Why do I have to wear myself out writing by hand when the art of printing has brought so many books to light so that we can cheaply put together a great library?' Truly, whoever says this is trying to conceal his own sloth. There is no technology built to make human lives easier that the inventors will not condemn their own children for using." This is a 15th century boomer meme, the equivalent of those historically inaccurate JPEG compressed pictures of text that are so popular on Facebook. Other technologies that are making kids these days too soft include such diverse accoutrements as seatbelts, lead paint, sushi, takeaways, Netflix, Google, bento boxes, overseas travel, bike helmets, pasta, flat screens, new math, prawn cocktail crisps, feminism, kissing with tongue, and of course, colour television. All notable for not having been invented by children. Fellow millennials, we must not become like this. Sign up at the link in the description to cash in your intergenerational envy today and use the coupon code Health and Safety for 15% off child mortality rates. The first successful printing press in England is run by a bloke called William Caxton. Like Chaucer, Caxton is also a big proponent of the English language. He translates a lot of foreign works into English, sometimes for the first time ever. Now this is a business decision. No one else is printing in English, so he's cornering a niche in the market for himself, and this way he doesn't have to compete with the big established printers on the continent who are publishing in Latin. But without Caxton, Chaucer probably wouldn't still be studied in schools today. The fact that Caxton is printing in English really helps standardise the language. At this time, you can pretty much spell English however you like, as long as the reader understands it. And English is also very diverse. Different parts of the country practically speak different languages. In an introduction to one of his books, Caxton tells the story of some merchants sailing down the Thames. And they land on the side of the river to buy food. So this is either like Kent or Essex. This is not far from London. And they go to a farmhouse and they ask the farmer's wife, "Do you have any eggs?" And she says, "Sorry, I don't speak French." And the merchant's like, "No, I mean, me neither. Just eggs, like little round eggy things." And she's like, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." And then another merchant leans in and he says, "Do you have any eieren?" And she's like, "Oh, eieren, yes, lots of eieren." And this was only down the river from London. So Caxton knows that the stuff he's publishing is going to have a wider distribution than anything written in English beforehand. So if he's translating a book from, say, French, and it has the word œuf in it, how should he translate it? Should he say eggs or eieren? Whichever one he picks, the other is going to die. And he picks eggs. Caxton was right. Because of him, the words that Chaucer chose for the Canterbury Tales happened to survive, when lots of other words in Middle English have probably died out. There's probably loads of dialect words from Cumbria and Dorset and Derbyshire that writers like Chaucer, for one reason or another, didn't use. And so those words have died without ever even being recorded. Britain is a very densely accented place. In the play Pygmalion, the linguist Henry Higgins boasts that he can tell where anyone's from within an accuracy of a 6-mile radius just from their accent. And this is a fictional superpower, but it's rooted in a real way Brits tell each other apart. Listening to people on the television, especially on the news, you get to tell the difference between a West Country accent.
Yes, Jerry. Or maybe your prejudiced worksite should have accommodated a nanobot of my size. Thanks for the hate crime, Jer.
And a Lancashire accent.
I shouldn't be here. I haven't done anything. There's been a mistake.
And a Glaswegian accent.
A French one and a British one. Both nuclear submarines. And it's easy to crash. It's so crowded, the North Atlantic.
And a Yorkshire accent.
A programme currently said to be unexpectedly popular is Love Island.
And you register it, sometimes subconsciously, when you meet someone new. But those dialects are getting less distinct over time. Except Glaswegian, apparently, which is just hanging out up there, doing its own thing. Kids these days don't speak with Cockney accents anymore. They speak MLE, Multicultural London English, which is Cockney mixed with Caribbean accents. And yes, white kids speak like this too, that's how they grow up. The many varieties from the north of England are sludging into one amorphous, general northern English. You can even see the trend in individual people, like the late Queen or David Attenborough, who sound a lot less posh in the 2020s than they used to in the 50s.
Within half an hour, there was a rustle in the bush, and there was the dragon.
I think it's a really common feeling among people of my generation and younger, especially if you're from any part of Britain except the south of England, to say that you're from a place, but you don't have the accent. And it can leave you feeling a bit adrift, like you have to prove where you're from. Some regional accents now only exist in archive recordings, like this great collection in the British Library. I don't think this is a trend that we can meaningfully reverse. It's just something that happens. But this doesn't mean that nothing's replacing them. Immigrant communities are creating new dialects that never existed before, like Bradford Asian English and MLE. And for every local dialect word, like Daps or Mardy or Culf, that are being lost, There are many, many more that are being added to my vocabulary every year because of my internet connection to people all over the globe, like Swifty, or Copium, or Solarpunk, Laggy, Meat Space, Yeet, Copy pasta. Every new communication technology brings with it fears of collapsing language. The internet means I don't have the dialect words that my grandparents used. The television meant that Brits stopped speaking with an accent from their town specifically and started speaking with an accent from their county or their region. And the printing press and Chaucer lost us the word éireann, even as it gained us so much else. Thank you very much for watching. I would particularly like to thank the Professor Emeritus of English from Calgary University, Murray McGillivray, for his rendition of the first 541 lines of the Canterbury Tales in Middle English, which is where I got the pronunciation for the intro to this video. Any mistakes are on my part. If you want to hear how a real professional does it, check the link in the description for his full version. No, wimples aren't sexy anymore. We honestly need to bring wimples back. Like, doesn't it look amazing? Historical dramas need to, stop being cowards and put their sexy female leads in wimples. Don't just put someone in a wimple because they're uptight. Do it! It's historically accurate. They're great. Ugh. You can, have someone take off their wimple as, a sign of trust or intimacy.